Mythos Busters, investigating the mystery, monsters, and madness of Arkham Horror, the card game.
Hello and welcome to Mythos Busters episode 28, where no, we didn't kick him off. Sean just had to leave for a very sudden personal situation, but he could be joining us later, so we might see him a little further into the episode. As always, I am Nick. Not as always, I guess. Well, I'm always Nick, but I'm not always the primary host of the show. This is going great.
Wow. This is going well.
Ian, save me.
I'll try. I kind of wanted to let you flounder, but I'm not that bad, I guess.
If there's anything I'm good at, it's floundering. So Ian is with us, as always. And we also have Scott today.
Indeed.
How's it going, guys?
It's going pretty good. I'm tired from work, but I'm super excited to talk about what we're going to talk about. So.
Yeah. Right before starting the episode, we realized we actually had some news this week and some interesting news to discuss. So I'm also excited to get going too. Mm-hmm. So today's episode, we're going to talk about again the one news article that has come out since our last episode, which is Black Star's Rise. I've got a quick community highlight I want to go over. We have a minor ruling from Scott, and then we're going to jump into our main topic, which is how hard is too hard, and it's discussing the differences between standard and hard and what you can do to prepare for it. And then, as always, we'll round out with some questions and tentacle time. So, guys, recent play stories, what have we been up to? I honestly haven't had the chance to play since our last recording, so I'm just going to go ahead and slide right by this part. But, Ian, did you do any prepping for our hard mode discussion?
Kind of. Not really. As we segue into it, I'll probably say it again, but I'm not that familiar with hard mode, so I'll be leaning on you two more so. But I did play a little bit of solo Rex hard mode and kind of solo Jenny, so basically 2 games worth, and nothing too much to speak of. I'll talk about it more in the actual hard mode discussion. As far as other games I've been playing, I've just been continuing my current campaigns through Echoes and getting ready for Oath to come out. Yeah,
I still haven't hit Echoes since the very first, I played it once, and that's it. It hasn't actually hit on my main campaigns yet, so it's still sitting there. It's all sleeved and ready to go, just haven't found the time for it, sadly. But it's a good scenario.
Are you guys ready to take a mental trauma about from what I was to say? I haven't got my Echoes pack yet.
Ooh, what? Wow. Really?
Yeah, my store has not gotten it.
Oh my god.
That's terrible.
I know.
And here I was losing my mind because I had just got the deck box from Arkham Knights just yesterday. And I was like, oh, it finally came. And here you are without the next scenario that everyone else has had for weeks.
Yeah,
oh, man.
I've had the Encounter Spoilers channel muted for a month. It's bugging me because there's 8,000 unread messages.
You can hear them ticking by.
It's a unique scenario. I'm not even going to get into it because it's good, but interesting. And just to remind everybody, we do have our meme contest going on. So go ahead and make those Arkham-related memes, whether they're about the game, they're about your favorite Arkham-related media, anything like that, and go ahead and send them into mythosbusterspod@gmail.com. And we will have a couple different winners who will win promos from Arkham Knights this year. One of the winners will be selected by the hosts here. We'll just kind of agree on the one that we find the most creative or the funniest or just our favorite. And then another winner will be selected by the community as we post all of the memes and we get your likes and comments on them. So keep that in mind. That contest goes, guys...
December 15th?
Thank you very much. Yes. December 15th. So you still have some time. Oh, all right. Moving right along, community highlights. I'll keep this brief because this I don't have a whole lot of exposure with this set of scenarios that I'm going to talk about real quick, but I did notice that on Arkham Central, a user by the name of Carl Stevens went ahead and submitted his 3-part campaign to Arkham Central, and it is called the Outsider Campaign. It looks pretty interesting. It starts off simple enough. I did take a look at the first scenario's cards, and that's all that I've looked at so far. But it looks like it's just a standard kind of monster hunt in this first scenario, and then he's got the 2 to follow up from there. Nothing really crazy as far as mechanics go, at least in the first scenario, but just the fact that we have another continuing story as opposed to a bunch of standalones, I think that's pretty exciting. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that. And from there, Ian, do you want to talk to us about Black Star's Rise?
I do. So Black Star's Rise is our newest news article, and it was announcing the 5th Mythos pack in the Path-Arcosa cycle, so second to the finale. So to kind of catch up on our story, after traveling to France, going into the catacombs underneath, we travel to an island commune, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Scott, you're closest to the French. Do you know how to pronounce this island commune? Mont Saint-Michel?
I would have to find the name. One sec. Keep on talking.
Okay, I'll keep talking as we get our proper French pronunciation. So anyway, it sounds like an interesting setting for what we're about to go through. But this kind of floors me with the creativity of it and just like the mind-boggling just gall of what Matt Dupin has done with the design here, which is there is no act deck in this scenario. There are 2 agendas, each representing bad things. The first agenda deck represents rising tides and floodwaters, and the second agenda deck is the storm kind of crashing into the island. And so basically there's not a ton of detail about how this works, but it kind of says you have to choose which agenda you're going to try to advance. They're both bad, apparently. There's no act, so I don't know. This just seems perfect for this cycle where it's messing with your mind, but this just seems like a perfect, not quite culmination because it's not the last scenario, but it definitely seems like a cool way to mess with your head.
Yeah, I was really like this. I literally just saw this, just literally minutes before we started recording, and it is surprising to say the least. Like, and I think I say this with almost every scenario that gets teased, but of everything I expected from this game, I never expected to see 2 agendas. And even like in our custom scenarios, I've talked about how it'd be cool to have like a second act to give players a choice. But of course, in true Arkham fashion, don't give them 2 good choices to pick from. Give them 2 bad choices to pick from. Oh, that's exciting. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, it looks really fun. And I like how you can put clues on there, and it gives you kind of a bonus, and you can weigh your decision based on the bonus it gives you. And that's Ian, you're pretty close. Mont Saint-Michel.
Okay.
Yeah.
give myself a little pat on the back.
If you plug your nose while you say anything, it makes it easier.
So in addition to what seems to be a super interesting scenario, we got 4 player cards spoiled, if my quick perusing is correct. Mm-hmm. The first one is Arcane Insight. And why don't you want to read that one, Nick?
Sure. Arcane Insight, not Insight, I don't know what that is. Ask your doctor if Insight is right for you. Arcane Insight is a Seeker asset. It's costed 3, and it requires 4 experience. It's a level 4 asset. Has a Will and Intellect icon. Spell traded, so we were wondering if off classes other than Mystic would get spells, and here's our first look at that. Uses 3 charges. And free action. While an investigator is taking his or her turn, spend 1 charge. Your location gets -2 Shroud until the end of this turn. Limit once per turn. And then it takes up an arcane slot. I like it.
Arcane super flashlight?
That's really good.
One of the things I really like about it is that it helps with those tests that we've talked about on this podcast that like the locations and where Doom awaits, for example, where it has to investigate on it, so you can't use a flashlight because this lowers the shroud for the end of until the end of the turn. Then that helps you for every test you take against it. With those tests, it was limited to once per turn anyway. But the point is, this basically helps you by lowering the shroud instead of being like an investigate action itself.
Right, and it even can be paired with investigate actions like flashlight
Right.
or like something like that. For when you're looking at a shroud of a location with a shroud of like 6 or something, you can suddenly knock this down to a 2, and that's something that almost anybody can investigate easily enough.
Yeah, and I like that it's till the end of this turn. So, I mean, if you go first and it's a 4-player game and you're all in one location to investigate, man, that is efficiency. Like,
Yeah.
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 And the cool thing about this and the other kind of off-class spell cards we'll see is that Akachi can make use of it because she's 0 to 4 with charges cards, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so she can actually take this one. So it's nice that that aspect of her deck building is actually going to mean something. Because right now it doesn't mean too much.
Black Star's Rise will be the Akachi set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll see decent play in Rex and Min.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think in Daisy, though, because I think the I don't want to say the main build, but the popular build, like this is with Higher Ed, the spell slinging Daisy, she's usually filling up her arcane slots, but...
Yeah, I could see Daisy make use of this. I think Min is definitely, like, to me that seems like the strongest case. Simply because Rex is so powerful anyway, like he doesn't need to worry about helping out everyone else. Because you can trigger this anytime anybody makes, starts their turn anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good tool regardless, you know? I think we're going to be seeing a lot of use at least right away with this, just to get an idea for when it's pertinent and when it isn't.
Yeah, it's a good card.
So the next one, which I will take because it's a green card, is Suggestion. 3 cost with cost 4 XP, so similar to Arcane Insight. Has 1 will and 1 agility icon. Spell traded, again, uses 3 charges. Action, exhaust Suggestion. To take an evade action, you add your will to your skill value for this evasion attempt. If you do not succeed by at least 2, remove 1 charge from Suggestion. So kind of some hints of lockpicks there where you have to remove a charge only if you don't succeed by at least 2. Reaction, when a non-elite enemy would attack you, spend 1 charge, cancel that attack. Very interesting.
Has Safina written all over it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love the design of this. I love that. I like that it's playing into the succeed by at least 2 or more, so we have another tool for that. I like that that you can essentially work to save those charges until you absolutely need them. So that's really cool too. I'm not too sure about the artwork on it. Like, are they presenting a suggestion?
Green.
Yeah, like I'm not sure what's going on in that art, but still a really cool card.
Yeah, I didn't even look at it closely, and now I'm like,
it's like a marionette. It's like they're,
Yeah.
I don't know. Are they creating a marionette double that they're?
Yeah, no, that
I don't
sounds
get
right. But having 3 charges worth of a dodge, I know it's not exactly the same because it's only when it attacks you versus dodge you can use on others. If you're noble like that, but that's pretty good. That gives you a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, and it is only non-elite enemies, so I mean, there's that, but
Yeah.
it's still spend a charge, cancel an attack, and because it's a reactive ability, like you can spend your turn using the first ability on Suggestion to try and get away from this enemy, and if they're that powerful, or if you have to stick around or whatever, then you can always end up using the charge for the second part. So really cool.
Yeah. And one thing I like too is once it's out of charges, you can still use the first action. Like, it's still like it doesn't require a charge. It's only if you fail. So
That's wow,
Yeah.
interesting. I never, like, in my head, I think no charges on a spell, then it's done. Do you think that's intended? Do you think that's how they, like, I mean, I
don't
would
know.
hope so.
But
It seems like a loophole.
that's
It
how
does
I'm
seem like
reading
a
it.
loophole.
Yeah.
That's really cool, though.
Yeah.
Well, Rogue's exploiting loopholes since the game released, so...
One clarification, too, on Arcane Insight I should throw in there, because someone corrected us in chat. End of this turn means end of that investigator's turn. So
right.
It wouldn't be for the whole table, which would just be bonkers.
So it's an instant flashlight. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually they use the wording until the end of your turn, but...
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So the next one, we don't have our mystic, our usual mystic reader to read this, so I'll give it to... Do you have the article up, Scott?
Oh, yeah.
The cards?
I'll do my best, Sean.
Arcane Initiate.
Arcane Initiate is a... So Arcane Initiate, it's a mystic ally, 0 cost, level 3, so 3 XP, asset, of course. It has the willpower and a fight pip. Ally and sorcerer traded, and has forced, after Arcane Initiate enters play, place 1 doom or 2 horror on it. And then it still has the same text as before. It's fast action, exhaust Arcane Initiate, search top 3 cards of your deck for a spell card and draw it, shuffle your deck. Takes up an ally slot and has 1 health and 3 sanity. So if you choose to put the 2 horror on it, it's basically a 1/1.
Yeah, I was just going to say, wasn't the original Arcane Initiate just a 1/1?
1/2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I mean, like, this is fantastic. Like, I always didn't like the Doom. I would gladly put 2 horror on this and just have a 1/1 instead of a 1/2 instead of a Doom. And 0 cost.
It opens it up so that you don't feel like you're hindering the team if you're not playing it during the witching hour. Like, this opens that up so much, and that's... Yeah, I think in any spell-heavy deck, 3 experience is good to drop on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit on the higher end of the XP side, but it's also the class with Delve Too Deep, so...
That's true.
Yeah. I wonder if they made it 3 XP to keep it away from certain other classes, now that it seems like Seeker's getting spells and Rogue is getting spells, right? Like, to keep it kind of within Mystic. But
yeah, whenever you see any card that's costed at 3 XP, that's kind of like what you have to think about. Like, that is kind of the unofficial gate for main class or not. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, Leo DeLuca, it costs 2 XP to reduce them by 1 cost, so there's 2 there. This goes down to 0, but you also get no Doom on it. Like, that's worth an extra XP, I think. So I think that's 3 is fairly costed, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah. I like it.
And I feel like it's one of the best draws in the game, for Mystics, obviously, who can take it. But I think I was really scared away from the Doom at first. And I don't, I play a lot of the classes, but I don't play Mystic a ton compared to, say, Rogue. But I've been using it a lot in Akachi because obviously she's super dependent on spells and wants a lot of them. And it's just like, you're just usually... because her deck is so mystic heavy and spell heavy, I'm like drawing a card each turn for nothing, just as a free trigger. It's pretty bonkers. So getting rid of that Doom cost to it would be pretty huge.
Yeah.
All right, the last card will also be a Scott card because it's Survivor. This is Not Without a Fight.
So great art, I must say.
Yes.
Not Without a Fight is a Survivor skill, level 0. It has a willpower, a combat, and an agility pip, innate traded, and commit to a skill test only if you are engaged with an enemy. For each enemy engaged with you, Not Without a Fight gains willpower, combat, and agility. So
copies itself for each enemy engaged with you.
Pretty much. So if you're engaged with an enemy, it is a guts, an overpower, and a manual dexterity. If you have one enemy engaged with you at one time, except for the card draw, but that's pretty good.
Sure. That's nice. I guess I didn't even think about that. I was thinking of multiple enemies, and I was like, but this still only helps you with 1 test. But no, with 1 enemy, you got 3 different good skills right there, so very nice.
And if you're engaged with an enemy, you're probably not investigating, and that's not
right.
Like, it's the other 3 skills. I think this is pretty good.
Yeah, I like it a lot for its versatility. That 3 out of 4 skills, you're getting basically an extra double up, like you said, one of the skills. And And unlike something like Rise to the Occasion, which is the one that's what is it, 2 or high, the difficulty has to be 2 or higher of your skill value
over your base.
Yeah, the which I've tried to use, and sometimes it comes in handy, but a lot of times it's just the cards searching for an occasion to play it, and not to search for the pun too much. Yeah. But for not without a fight, like you're gonna be engaged with an enemy at some point in the game multiple times. Like that's just something that happens. So I don't feel like there's gonna be a lot of situations where you're just like, oh, I don't know what I can use this for.
Say hello to another golden splash pick for our Dunwich investigators.
Yeah.
So, really good card. Love it.
Yeah. All right, I think that's about it. Yeah, I didn't miss any. So that's about it for Black Stars Rise, and looks to be. I'm really looking forward to this pack in terms of the scenario and the player cards.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Scott, what do you got for us regarding rules?
So there was a recent chat, and this is kind of an older ruling regarding Zoe's Cross and massive enemies. So if a massive enemy spawns at Zoe's location, she has her cross, or Zoe moves into a location with a massive enemy, it doesn't count as engaging an enemy for the sake of Zoe's Cross. Because a massive enemy, you're just considered to be engaged when you're at that location. And I understood that ruling, but it always kind of didn't fully make sense in my head. And one of our listeners on the Discord, BD Flory, who's like one of our big rules guys, he explained it kind of, have you ever been in a card game where they say your hand is considered to, you're considered to have an extra card in your hand, for hand limits or whatnot? At no point did you draw that invisible card. It just exists in your hand. So think of massive that way. At no point did you engage the enemy. You are just engaged. And I thought that makes total sense to me, because the not drawing of invisible cards was a lot easier for my brain to process. And I thought I'd just share that for listeners, because that's a rule question that comes up like every week or two, because I think it is kind of confusing. So I just thought I'd pass that explanation along, because I think it so succinctly explains things. So
It's like one of those situations where like the light's on. I didn't flip the switch,
right?
But the light just came on. Like, okay, interesting.
Yeah. So there you go.
Does nobody else have those phantom light switch moments? That might just be me. All right. Well, on that note, let's delve right into our discussion topic, where we're discussing standard versus hard. Now, when we first really got into this game a year ago, and when I was actually digging into the game, when I had the box in front of me, I kept looking at the difficulties and thinking, hard is going to be my home. Like, that's where I'm going to live. I approached this like I approached a lot of video games that I play, where it's like, yeah, I want to experience the game, but I also want to be challenged. I have since kind of changed my tune a little bit. Like, now I'm kind of to the point where I'm like, I don't know if hard is really where I want to go. I don't know if I see expert as this like goal to achieve anymore, simply because of how the game has progressed and now that we have kind of a deeper understanding of the mechanics and everything. But still, it's still really fun to, if you're beating scenarios handily, or if you're like, I want to experience the sharper edge of Arkham's Razor, then you definitely want to give that hard difficulty a try. So, Scott, you came up with this topic. Do you want to kind of talk us through it?
Yeah, sure. It was actually suggested. I can't remember which listener. I apologize. Who suggested it in on our Discord chat about making that jump to hard. And totally agree, Nick. Like, when I first got into it, I was like, oh, I'm going to find a place in hard. I think that's where I'm going to play. But I got really comfortable in standard. And whenever I was playing standard, I always flip the scenario card and look at the icons on the other side and be like, ooh, that seems gross. Yeah. I'm just going to... But I think it's come to a point now, like you said, I want a bit of edge to this game. And if you think about our Iron Man, like, we flew through that Iron Man on standard. And
yeah,
if you're a player who's been playing a lot and you're refining decks and everything, I think hard is where you need to go, because I find it a lot more rewarding. And playing on hard is actually my go-to now, not standard. I like that challenge. So I guess the first thing we'll talk about because the one of the most obvious ones is the big switch to the token bag. You're going to have a different setup of tokens. One big thing is there's no more Hail Marys with some tests. There's no plus ones. So it's 0 is the highest you can get besides your Elder Sign, and some investigators have 0 for their Elder Sign. So if you're 1 down on standard, you could be like, come on, +1, and sometimes it shows up. Like,
Sure.
On a shotgun blast, maybe, right? Like, yeah!
Yeah.
That's not an option anymore. And on the opposite side of it, the negatives go deeper. So you have a static -5 on hard, and on expert, which we'll touch on a little bit, I think, you have a -6 and a -8, and you only have a single 0 in the bag. So expert is just gut-punchingly difficult.
Just brutal.
Yeah, because whenever you're playing on standard, you're like, you know what, I'm going to be +4 on my token draw, so basically it's the tentacles that can stop me. On expert, It's like, well, I guess I have to get to +8 if I want to guarantee it. So,
Yeah.
how does that make you feel with the bag switch, as far as you guys? You like switching bags? Or...
Going, like, when I first started playing on hard, it didn't feel all that bad to me. I was just like, I don't know why everybody thinks this is so terrible, because I was just doing a solo Roland campaign through Dunwich on hard and kind of, having fun with it. But then the more I played, the more those tokens came up, especially when I'm adding those tokens to the bag through the course of my game, and it's just like, oh, here's another Elder thing, and oh, that's a -5 now instead of whatever it was on standard. Like, it does definitely ramp up things for you.
Yeah, I think in general, like I said earlier, I don't have a ton of experience with hard just because I've been comfortable in standard, and you know, Nick, you mentioned video games, but I've always been a kind of player who just kind of plays video games on standard. I'm just like, well, it's standard, so that must be the intended experience. I'll just play games that way. But I do think with something like Dunwich, like when you... I think I'll start delving more and more into hard mode as the game goes on, because with something like Dunwich, I don't think this game is the type of thing where like a scenario is solvable necessarily, but after you've played Dunwich, like God knows how many times I've played it now, you do kind of figure out the strategies and rhythms for each scenario to the point that it does become like you're going to succeed more often than you fail. So I think hard mode is good for that. Specifically about the token bag, I think the biggest thing it changes is just the math. Like, being 2 over is kind of the sweet spot usually in standard, and then on hard mode, at least you're all of a sudden looking at maybe +3 to be more certain, and you do have to worry about, like, if you want that sure, quote unquote sure thing, you have to go 5 over instead of 4 over.
So one big thing, building on the token bag changing, is that scenario card flipping over to the hard/expert side. One of the big... There's kind of, 4 big changes. One is the negatives are usually worse, right? They're just... The straight-up modifiers are worse. Another big change is a lot of the times in scenarios, it'll say -2. If you fail, do X. Now, it basically just says... like on Blood on the Altar, the tablet says -2 if you're in a hidden chamber, reveal another token. On hard, it says -3, reveal another token.
Yeah.
The same thing with the Elder thing is -3 if you fail, place a Doom on the current agenda. On hard, it's just -3, place a Doom. So it's just straight up, just take it.
Yeah, like this is what the game wants to do, and on hard and expert, you have less of an opportunity to prevent that. And that's something that I've kind of adopted when I work on, like when I design my own scenarios, is I do exactly that. Like when I flip the card over, it's like, what should be different? Just increase the difficulty and change it from a condition to a constant.
Yeah.
That seems like a good way. Like that seems kind of like the standard for most scenarios, at least so far.
Yeah. A couple other examples. House always wins. The tablet is -2 if you fail, discard 3 resources. On hard, it's just discard 3 resources. So you just lose money. Yeah. I won't read all the examples. I had a bunch listed, but you get the point.
Yeah, I think it's part of that aspect of hard, what I was talking about, where it makes things less predictable. That, you know, there are times where you may get to your engine is going, and more often than not, you're at a point where, like, you know, I'm going to succeed on this test except for the tentacle or except for the worst. And so a lot of the standard mode stuff are -2 at most, or maybe -3, and if you don't succeed, then that stuff will go off. So if you're kind of always being above that, or most of the time, then you know you're not going to suffer those. Whereas, like, hard mode is true wild card, where it's like something bad could happen at any moment. There's nothing you can do about it. So
Yeah.
I think it forces you to have to roll with the punches a lot more.
Another thing that changes with the card flipping over is bad things just get worse, besides the modifiers. So I chose Midnight Masks. I think a lot of people are familiar with this one. I'm going to read through the 3 modifiers and then read through the hard and expert ones. So the skull is -X. X is the highest number of doom on a single cultist. The acolyte is -2. Place a doom on the nearest cultist. And the tablet is -3. If you fail, place 1 of the clues on location. Expert is skull is -X. X is the total number of doom in play. Not just on a cultist. So if you have a bunch on the agenda, you're that negative can be -8, right? Like that's
Well, and in Midnight Masks, like, the agendas have thresholds of like 8, don't they?
Yeah.
So you can get that up to like a 6 or 7 by end game. Like, oh man.
including the cultists out. Like this,
Including the
this could be
cultists.
10, -10. Like that is a possibility.
Oh yeah.
The acolyte is -2. Place 1 doom on each cultist enemy in play, not the nearest. If there are no cultist enemies in play, reveal another token.
No, wasn't bad enough. You don't get off scot.
Yeah.
And then the tablet is -4. If you fail, place all your clues on your location.
That could
Talk
be
about a
so
feel bad.
enraging. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's bad things get worse. My last example is occasionally you can just fail because screw you. So on Where Doom Awaits, I'm sad Sean isn't here because I would totally get him to read this because I know he loves this scenario. On standard, the tablet is -2, but in brackets -4 instead if it's agenda 2. On hard, it's -3. If it's agenda 2, you automatically fail instead.
Extra tentacle.
So, yeah, that's what.
Now the only recourse to that is that in Dunwich, like, you could potentially get to this point without adding a tablet, right?
Yes, you could.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's the only recourse to that. But that's something you got to plan from scenario 1.
But you're also
so-
playing
Yeah.
on hard all the way to this point as well, right? So,
right.
Which makes
Assuming
it
you haven't
harder.
given up.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a nice plan you had. It'd be what a shame it'd be if something happened to it. So 2 things I want to kind of talk about the scenario card really quick before we move on. One, if you're considering the jump to hard, but it jumping to hard kind of freaks you out a little bit. I've heard of like standard plus, where you make a hard token bag, but you play on the standard card. So the negatives, like, it's a little bit worse, but you don't have the like gut punching bad like picture tokens. So
Yeah, that's interesting.
that's an option. I've tried it. It's kind of neat. It's a good stepping stone. The other thing is the card Defiance. The skill card, it gives you, it's Mystic, 0 XP, a wild icon, and it says name a token type. If you draw that token during the skill, discount its modifier, its text, everything. That card really shines in hard. I think on expert it's a little less because you still have the hard -6, the -8, the -5.
right.
But on hard, what's really changing from standard is those tokens. And Defiance can really give you an edge on that. So, if you can take Defiance.
I think one of the things I like about Defiance is because I've seen the critique of it that it's like just rolling the dice a shot in the dark. Like, there's all these bad symbols that could possibly come out. But say, looking at the Midnight Mass example, like, you're gonna choose the one that would be the one to screw you, right? Like, there's a lot of them that are just like you look at the skull, the one we mentioned that's minus X is the total number of doom in play. Well, I might not pick that one because that's just a failure, and failure might suck, but it's not the end of the day. Like, maybe I pick the tablet because if I place my 5 clues on my location, that's basically game over, you know? So I think the strength of Defiance is that you can choose the option that will screw you, the guaranteed screw option,
right?
To use the technical term. And so, yeah, you might not draw it, sure, but Defiance is basically like the insurance that will stop you from suffering the worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it helps the math too, because all of a sudden you've like if you're playing Carcosa, you start with 3 skulls in the bag. It changes those skulls to 0, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just added 3 more zeros to the bag, so maybe you only have to go 2 up instead of 3 up, as far as the math goes on odds and averages and stuff.
Right.
And yeah, you just basically pick the token that's going to really screw you. So on Where Doom Awaits, you pick the tablet because it just automatically fails you, so you're like, no. And that's a big thing about the I found, like, with these picture tokens in hard, sometimes the tentacle is actually a preferred way to fail.
Right, because it just shuts you out, and it doesn't have anything else beyond that.
Yeah, you just fail.
You're just out in action.
Yeah, so...
You know what to expect from the tentacle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very straightforward way to get... the impression I get is that it seems like to be successful, or at least increase your chances, you almost have to... Like, standard mode, I'll of course look at the tokens to know what I'm facing, but I feel like in hard and expert, you kind of have to really study these tokens and what they can do to know, like, with each test that you're gonna take, like, these are the possible effects that can happen. What does that mean? Like, if another Doom gets placed on the agenda now, is it worth it to take that test with that in mind? Like, you know, a lot of times in standard mode, it's like, I have nothing else to do. Let me just throw an investigate test against the wind or something, you know? Like, or let me just try this parlay test, even though I don't have a way of really boosting it. But I feel like in hard and expert, it's like you take the tests when you know that it's really worthwhile to take that test.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I've noticed, because with my wife, when we play on easy a lot because it's less of a ball buster, and we can just kind of enjoy the game. And one thing I've noticed with that is that we don't look at the scenario card until the token is drawn, and then it's like, wait, what does this one do? Whereas with hard or expert, like, yeah, you definitely want to be aware of that before you start the game, probably even before you begin your, like, build your deck. Like, you want to know what those tokens are going to do to you, so that you're properly set up to address that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, exactly, you want to kind of look at this card. Midnight Mask is a perfect example with the tablet. When you're in hard and expert, maybe you don't want to, like, store up a bunch of clues and then spawn a bunch of cultists at once. As soon as you have those clues, you get rid of them, because if you draw that tablet, all your work is for naught, right? Like, they just go in your location. You're like, well, that set me back 3, 4, 5 turns, like, or 3, 4, 5 actions, I should say. Maybe turns. I don't know. Like, it can be really bad.
Yeah, I think it possibly rewards paying attention to those things. You know, let me spend clues to spawn before I take any tests. Or for the cultists that place 1 doom on each cultist enemy in play, hey, maybe let's have the big bruiser investigator kill some cultists. Let them go first before everyone else is doing a bunch of tests and potentially drawing cultist tokens to place doom around the board. So just, I guess, keeping those things in mind, the order in which you do things.
So now that we've discussed pulling those tokens, some strategies that playing on hard I've discovered, and talking with other people who kind of use that hard and expert as their go-to game. Approximately 78% of mathematicians agree that +3 is a good place to aim for on hard. Like, you know, you always hear on standard, like, 2 up is a pretty statistically good place to be. On hard, you're looking at +3. Expert, it's kind of like a 4.5. You get kind of diminishing returns going from 4 to 5, but there still is a bit. And because of some of the picture tokens, some of them are 5s. So, yeah. But +3 is a good place to start with that.
Yeah, I think that's a number that's going to change as the campaign goes on. Like if you're looking at Dunwich and you've got, 2 scenarios that add tokens just right at the start. So I'd say that by the end of the campaign, you're looking at you want to probably be in the 4 to 5 range on hard. But yeah, I mean, scenario 1, 2, 3 is definitely what you want to think about.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that I always remember is 2, 3, 4 on standard hard expert to start. But another thing about testing when you're building your deck, having an investigator with a 5 and a stat makes an incredible difference. Like, on standard, it feels like, oh, this is easy mode, kind of. On hard, it's like, I have a fighting chance at doing this test. So if first time you're going to hard, maybe choose an investigator with a 5 stat, or think about your team. Let's make sure, if you're bringing a combat guy, maybe bring Mark, Bring Agnes if she's going to kind of be doing whatever. That one extra stat makes a lot of difference, because if you are aiming for that +3, that's just one less skill pip you have to chuck.
And potentially along those lines, I guess that makes allies that just passively boost your stats even more valuable. They're already pretty valuable, but it seems like that every little bit would make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm posting a link in chat. One of our listeners, Lockwood, did a lot of... He's got a website up. I talked to him today. He's going to do some more statistical analysis and stuff. But there are charts and percentages and all that stuff about different difficulty modes and how far you want to be above the test based on percentages and everything like that. So if you want to get a better grasp on that, I put the link there. We can include in the show notes as well, I assume. But
awesome.
So another thing about testing, chuck cards for skill icons.
Oh yeah.
In standard, it's kind of like, oh man, I kind of want to keep this because I might use this gun, or I'm not sure if I need this flashlight. You know what? Hard feels more rushed because I feel like there's more pressure on you. You want to succeed at those tests. So sometimes you just have to chuck it. Like if you're not going to use that card this turn or the next, and you're just kind of saving it for a rainy day is today because you're playing hard. So chuck it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something that I feel like I was really prepared for at the start of this game because of my time spent playing the Star Wars LCG and how every card in Star Wars has Force icons that you can commit to the Force struggle. And my kind of breakaway moment playing Star Wars was that, all of these cards in my hand have now become ammunition for me to win this struggle. And Arkham, that's immediately what I went to. I'm like, if I'm literally not going to play it next turn, then get rid of it. And that was like, it's huge. And again, when you're adding higher numbers to the bag, that's something that you're going to need to do. And so don't be married to the cards in your hand. Be ready to trash them to get those skill icons.
Yeah. I think of Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog when he's in the laundromat and he's like, oh, I gotta go. And she's like, what about your clothing? And he kind of looks in. I don't love these things, and then he walks out. That's how you have to think about your cards in your hand. Like,
exactly.
Right.
Unless you have a definitive plan for that card, if you need it for a skill test, you need it for a skill test. And on that note, when you're building your deck, and I know, Ian, you said this, I think a month or two ago, you started using the ArkhamDB website to look at the balance of your skill pips within your deck a lot more closely, and tuning your deck around that. That is so important to get a good balance of what skill pips you think you'll need for what deck you're doing, right? Yes. Like if you're Agnes, you probably want a lot of willpower pips, right? Because you're going to have all these different things, or if you're Mystic, that use willpower instead of whatever other stat. You want to make sure you're going to have skill pips, even on your non-skill cards, so you can chuck those to skill tests. So that's an awesome tool.
It's definitely something that you should do in general and standard, but in hard mode it's even more important. And those charts are super useful, but not even just that, but you might also want to drill down to like almost separating your cards between the key cards that you know you're going to play, like the core of your investigator setup, you know, your machetes and your Dr. Milan's, whatever the case may be. Those core cards are kind of one category. And then the other category are a lot of the events and some of the other cards that are like the in case of this situation type cards. And those are the cards I think you really want to drill down and think about their what skill pips you have there, because those are the ones you're often going to be in the position of chucking them, because your core cards you're usually playing as soon as you get them. So I think that's where it really comes down to, like, when picking those cards that are your more kind of flex spot cards, making sure that they have the icons you're really going to need.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of deck building, boosts in this level of difficulty are really important. So you have a couple different options. Ian, you mentioned the static boosts. They're worth their weight in gold. Like, if you can get a +1 to whatever stat permanently on the board, that is less cards you're going to have to chuck to future tests, and that is just strictly card advantage, right? It's like that, like I said, the 5 stat makes it a little bit easier. If you can make that a 6 stat base, your tests are going to get easier, and that is so key.
Yeah, definitely. Static boosts are, I mean, they're some of the strongest effects in the game, and so when you're approaching a difficulty like hard, where, you know, you have to take the game more seriously at that point, like you have to buckle down and get serious about this to a certain degree. Those static boosts, they go from being nice to pretty much being essential.
One type of card, this is another type of boost that we kind of panned early on, and I still I'd say that they're contentious. Let's say they're contentious.
Sure.
I'll agree that people don't like them.
I
like them
on standard difficulty. Like, I think on easy,
right.
I think you don't need them. On standard,
right,
depending on the deck. But the talents where you spend money to boost an action, I'm specifically talking about the ones that cost 2. They came in the core set. You know, the permanent ones are amazing.
Yes.
But those talents, arcane studies, physical training, hard knocks, those ones, those are actually pretty critical. Because you can, when you're going into a test, to get to that +3, maybe a +4, you're spending resources. And in the click economy, it's worth it to spend an extra resource or two, which some people would say is an action, but whatever, to make sure that...
They would be wrong.
I'm so torn. I can't wait till that episode. It's worth it to spend that money. Think of skids, right? You're spending 2 resources for an extra action. What if you can spend 2 resources to boost this, to make sure this passes, so you don't have to take another action to take another test that then you have to pump again with skill cards or whatever. Those talents are really good.
Yeah, I think that most of those talents have a home in a lot of level 0 decks. Not all of them for sure, but a lot of level 0 decks have a place for those talents. And the reason why I talk about them and why I love them is simply because when I really kind of like saw their use, I was playing Jenny, and that was when I was like, oh, if I just do 2 arcane studies and 2 hard knocks, I don't need skill cards in this deck. Well, obviously, if I'm playing on hard, I'm still going to want skill cards, but it's like they're useful, like they really are. And chances are that, I mean, you're turning your resources into basically extra cards you can chuck to tests. Anything you can do to get over those -5s, you know.
Yeah, that idea of, in any card game, kind of, and especially in Arkham, being able to convert cards into resources into cards, or into actions or something like that action advantage, is super important, especially in hard, because you feel so much more pressured. And on that, deck building in general, you'll probably have less time for like neat little tricks. Concentrate on the basics, like pass tests, get clues, kill enemies. You know what I mean? Like, don't try and be cute about it. Like, don't drop dynamite at your feet. Like, that's neat. But there's probably better ways of doing stuff. So if you're bringing jank, you're going to have a harder time. Not saying it won't work, but a solid, reliable deck that just does the basics, I think is going to get you really far.
Yeah, which I think those spendy talents, if we want to call them that, are a good example of that. Because I think one way to think about the game is that every encounter card is basically a way of the other side, the evil side, trying to put pressure on your hand and tax your hand, because when they're throwing out an enemy or some kind of will test, like, those are all things that are pressuring you to, like, chuck cards from your hand, as we talked about, and you need to do that to pass tests, and it gets worse in hard and expert. So giving yourself another outlet, like, instead of checking a card, I can spend resources, is, like, invaluable when you think about it that way.
Yeah. So another point I want to bring up is, and this is kind of an action economy thing. It's kind of like, chucking deduction into an investigate test. It's action economy, right? You're throwing a card out, you're converting that card into an action, because if you succeed, you're getting 2 clues, which would normally take you 2 actions, etc., etc. So the idea of consolidating tests, where on standard, you might say, okay, I have to hit this enemy for 4 damage, and I have 2 vicious blows in my hand. Do I chuck a vicious blow on the first test and a vicious blow on the second test to kind of spread out my chance of, getting a bad roll? Whereas I think in hard, you have 2 ways of doing it. Either, like, let's take the example of 4 health enemy. Do you chuck 2 vicious blows into the first test and just make sure you're at +6 and just do it? And then the next test, it's like, if I fail, maybe someone else can come by and do a single damage. A single damage isn't that hard to do sometimes. Or do you do a single damage and then figure out, okay, I did that 1 damage, now I pile on for the 3 damage hit with the 2 vicious blows.
That's a tough one, yeah.
Sometimes I found it hard. It's worth it to consolidate tests. Like, make 1 big test and 1 test that's not as high risk, instead of taking the risk and splitting it between the 2. You want to try and high roll 1 test, and just the second test is whatever.
Yeah, every test is that much more difficult to overcome, so you want to throw everything you can at a single test to ensure that passes, and then that way there's less pressure overall on any subsequent tests that you have to do.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Rex walks into the hidden chamber of Blood of the Altar, and he has 2 level 2 deductions, right? Like, you just, okay, Rex, investigate 2 level 2 deductions, like 6 clues, like that kind of thing.
Let me find an outlet for this vacuum.
Yeah. So I find consolidating tests really helpful for me.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that's obviously that's going to change on a case by case basis.
Sure,
absolutely. It depends on the enemy, depends on everything else, but ultimately, yeah, you want, like, every test that you attempt, you want to succeed, and you want to do everything you can to succeed that test first and foremost. So.
And if it's a high value test where, you're going to go +5 because only the tentacle will stop you, you might as well make it +6 and make it even higher value, because that tentacle is like 1 in 20 in the bag. You just have to take that chance of rolling that natural 1. It might happen and you'll get screwed, but that's hard mode. So it's just basically getting screwed over and over. Speaking of tests, one of the key things I found also in hard mode when building a deck, testless damage and clues are your path to victory. I can't overstate this. Like, the ability to do damage or get clues without having to touch the token bag is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think you guys have, like, obviously everyone's experienced this in Standard, right? Like, Agnes, what an amazing ability she has. Zoe's Cross, Lantern, Beat Cop, Guard Dog, Brother X, Dynamite. Like, it's all, in hard mode, it's just so comforting to be able to, like, I can just go grab a clue. I can just do 1 damage.
Yeah, it makes all the difference when you can just say no to the chaos bag and literally, like, just ignore that for a section of the game. Like it's huge. It's absolutely huge, and that's something that I've always said is like 100% necessary in expert, because in expert, like everything in that chaos bag is going to cause you to fail. Like there's very little way out of it. And so, but even on hard, like you don't have that -6 and -8, but you still have like those symbol tokens that are going to ruin your day, like we talked about. So yeah, you want to be avoiding tests at all costs.
Yeah. And like thinking of Dunwich is a great example. Whippoorwills, right? Like they already give you -1. You have to engage them to actually deal with them. Like they're just making your numbers horrible. To be Agnes or to have Lantern, oh my god, Lantern is so fantastic in Dunwich because you just carry it around, you're investigating, and then you're like, oh, Whippoorwill, dead. Like just instant Lantern fodder. Same thing with Zoe's Cross. I engage it, it dies. Going over clues, look what I found, because you're probably going to fail. Art student, drawn to the flame, which is risky because you're drawing more encounter cards.
Yeah.
But you're still getting 2 clues, so maybe you're able to handle the encounter cards and not pass the 6 shroud or whatever.
Sure.
Evidence, Gravedigger Shovel, working a hunch. I included Rex, kind of, because he kind of just gets an extra clue for doing Rex things.
He consolidates, yeah.
Action advantage, yeah.
Yeah. Same way like Roland does, where once you defeat an enemy, get a clue. Like anything that you can do to blend those actions together and accomplish multiple things with one test is huge.
Right, and with Roland, you'd rather test a combat test than an investigation test, usually, right? Because you're going to have guns, you're going to have vicious blows, you're going to have all the cards to be fighty guardian guy, and then you just get testless clues. So,
I guess along the same lines, then, I definitely agree with that. When I was building a couple of decks facing hard mode, even with Rex, I was tending to include some of those auto clue grab cards that I wouldn't in standard mode, because in standard mode he's just gonna do the thing, but in hard mode I want to avoid some of those tests. But I guess along those same lines, then player cards that require you to take a test seem to lose a little bit of value in hard and expert, because you don't want to give the bag another chance to draw one of those tokens. So do I want to try burglary in this deck, or should I just do emergency quiche when I can just get the resources for free? Things like that.
Right.
You think medical text was bad on standard? Wait until you lose.
We got to get a counter of.
Wait until you lose all your clues and you hit your buddy for 1. Like.
I was gonna say we need a counter going of how many times investigators are killed with medical texts on expert or something like that, because I'm sure it's happened at least once.
I really think the community needs to come together and make like an achievement list for Arkham Horror in general.
We have Josh, DeLarp guy, in our Discord made one early on in the game's life, but I think we could do with an updated one. Yeah.
We should have like an overall one and then like specific campaign ones. That's another topic, but
yeah. So when we're talking about these cards that replace tests or ignore tests, so like working on a hunch, generally considered to be the seeker card for non-seekers, do you include like working on a hunch in a Rex deck on hard?
Hell yes. Well,
you do. Okay.
Maybe 1.
Okay. And I don't agree or disagree necessarily. That's just something like whenever I see working on a hunch, I think that goes in Roland. I wouldn't put it in a Rex, but now that we're talking about, it's like, well, maybe not. Okay, maybe not Rex. Let's talk about Daisy. Like Daisy's a 5-up, so she's decent in hard. Would you put working on a hunch in her deck?
I still think maybe 1.
Sure.
Like it's just for. I mean, it depends on the number of players too, because like if you have an odd number of players and you're playing Rex, maybe you pour all your resources into one Rex text or one Rex test. You make it that high value skill test, right? And then working on a hunch is okay, I'll grab that 3rd clue.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Because I think we can all agree that on standard we wouldn't put working on a hunch in Daisy or Rex.
I would completely
because it's just right, yeah. So that's cool. That's very interesting that when you just raise the difficulty 1 step, that adds value to cards that didn't have it before, and simultaneously removes value from cards that earlier you might have thought, oh, this is really important. So
yeah. Same thing with art student, right? Like it's working on a hunch with a body.
Right. Yeah. But art student goes in my Rolodex anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, for the sanity
I mean?
soak, for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess the last point I want to touch on too, if you're starting to get into hard mode, R1 is not the only one. Sometimes it's just better to resign with a moderate result than to risk trauma for the best result.
Right.
You just have to admit sometimes, you know what, this is hard mode or this is expert mode. Okay, thanks game. I've gotten what I can out of this scenario. I just need to, run away, lick my wounds. I'll come back next time. There's no shame in that. You don't have to kill the experiment. Maybe you just rescue the students, right? Like you get them out. You don't have to kill the guy and get them out.
So I don't know if you're in a similar position, Scott, but I've actually found that whenever I try hard mode now, like I almost always just do standalone games. Like I don't ever make it my campaign. Like standard still feels good throughout the course of a whole campaign because as we've seen, there are scenarios that can just be straight up punishing, even on standard, like Essex County Express. I can't imagine trying Essex County on hard or expert. Good God.
Essex Dick Punch Express, yep.
Right, yeah. But so yeah, to me, like when I think about playing hard, I think about, okay, I'm going to set up this scenario for standalone and really try, because that's when I really want to optimize. And of course, I want access to those level up cards without having to go through 3 scenarios of hard. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I've landed on playing it.
I'm a sucker for punishment, I guess, because I rarely play standalone. If I'm playing standalone, I'm playing the standalone scenarios, like the side quests. Otherwise, I'm playing campaigns. And I really love hard. Like, I think I played enough on standard. I'm like, okay, I know these campaigns. I know the ins and outs. I know what I need to upgrade into what order and everything like that.
Right.
Hard just turns it up a notch and forces me to do better. And that's what I like about it. Expert still, I'm like, I don't know.
Maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah. Right.
Expert seems like I used to be a huge Halo fanatic. It was the legendary level, right? Like you didn't play legendary on Halo to have fun. You played legendary on Halo to say, I beat the game on legendary. That's what expert is to me. So I plan to beat each campaign in like get R1 in each campaign in expert someday, but just once, and say I've conquered this. I can move on.
So, I used to think that way. Like at this game's start, that's kind of how I thought. Like I kept looking at the difficulties and going, man, everyone's scared of expert, but like that would be so cool to say I did this in expert. But the more I play this game, the more I realize, or for me personally, difficulty isn't, in my opinion, it's not as much of an accomplishment as it is in a video game. And now I'm going to draw a comparison to Bloodborne, because I know Bloodborne pretty well, and I've played that a lot recently, and I've talked about it. It's one of those games it's punishing because you need to learn it. And then once you learn it, then you start to master it. And that's when it goes from being punishing to being routine, but it's routine to where it'll still get you if you don't have your guard up. Like it's something that it forces you to learn the game and to get better through repetition. That to me is like a difficulty that's worth, that feels accomplishing when you do it. Expert in Arkham Horror, because all you're doing is you're just turning the numbers up, and there's no change to the encounter cards, there's no change to how the scenario flows. It's literally just crank those numbers higher. Like that, it's lost some of its allure to me as a challenge, and that's why I'm like, I don't even know if I'll try. I've tried it expert a couple times, in the past, but I don't even know if I'll do it again. Maybe in a year or two when we have all these sick-ass player cards that we can put in our decks. But for now, I'm just kind of like, I'm okay sitting in standard and visiting hard occasionally. I don't know, Ian, if you're in a similar boat, if that's why you tend to favor standard or not, but that's kind of where I've landed.
Yeah, I feel like I could definitely see myself delving into hard because it does kick it up a notch, and specifically the biggest thing that I think changes is kind of that flip of the scenario card that adds a whole nother level. Whereas expert feels like another step where it's just like, I don't know, it almost feels like too much RNG at that point. Like,
Right.
the span of like 0 to -8 or whatever it is. Like, I'm not sure, is that... And I don't know, this is just kind of how I've thought about it so far. This may or may not be true, but at that point, I'm not even sure, is this my skill at the game, or is this just like, just the luck of the draw at that point? But yeah. I guess after a couple years and we do have more player cards, maybe that will be more of like an ultimate test type thing.
Well, I think of it too as, like, Ian, you play Lord of the Rings a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, do you play Lord of the Rings? I can't remember.
I don't own it, but whenever I'm with Sean,
Right.
we usually play at least a game.
It's like nightmare mode in that game, right? Like it's an enhanced challenge. That's how I see hard mode. Like, nightmare mode is not unbeatable, and it's not unbelievably destructive. Whereas the Gen Con quests are like the expert mode in this game, where it's just like, oh, what's that? You didn't bring an exactly tuned deck. Well, you're gonna lose.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But now, correct me if I'm wrong, with Nightmare Mode in Lord of the Rings, doesn't that actually change the composition of the encounter?
it does.
It
yes.
does, yeah.
But
See, I would be much more interested in Expert Arkham if it added a new encounter set and took out, like, if in the Gathering you didn't have rotting rats anymore and instead you had, Agents of Cthulhu or something
really
like that.
angry
that would
rats.
be more interesting. Yeah. Yeah, just because then it presents a challenge that is something you can plan around and that you can work towards, like, actually accomplishing, because then it gives you a different way to approach the same scenario, whereas in current expert it's literally just like just try harder, dude.
Yeah.
Just get good.
Yeah.
Just raise those numbers.
it's hard
Well, the
mode.
other
They just turned it up.
The other thing too is Lord of the Rings didn't get its nightmare mode until, I can't remember exactly, but third or fourth cycle in, something like that. Whereas we've gotten an Arkham Hard and Expert baked in from the beginning. So I'm thinking back to the early days of LOTR. If we had gotten like nightmare packs right away, like, would I have even touched them at first with as limited as the card pool was? And probably not. It probably would have taken me a while before I got to doing it at that level. So I think it's possibly the same type of thing here.
Now just talking about that, now I really want to see that. I want to see them go back to Night of the Zealot and just give us like 3 new encounter sets, 1 for each scenario, and just be like, here you go, try this campaign again. Oof. Exciting stuff. But yeah, I mean, I suddenly the conversation switched over to expert, but yeah, even going from standard to hard, like, there's different things to expect. It's not nearly as punishing as expert is, but at the same time, like, it's something that you can plan around, as we've talked about. It's something that is surmountable. It's not like a goal that's just out of reach, depending on what you draw out of the bag. Like, you can do it, and even with the card pool we have currently, you can build for that.
And you know what? Matt has said that, because people ask them about the single core set experience, right? Because when you buy a single core set, they say you can play the entire game this way. And he said, I have gotten both solo and with a group R1 on the core set campaign on expert with the intro decks. So,
yeah.
But I mean, again, RNG had probably played like 50 games, but it is doable.
Yeah.
Now imagine putting in like refined decks and everything like that. It's doable. It's just difficult.
So. I put a lot more stock into that statement when he said that we beat the campaign on expert with a solo deck. And it's like, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's awesome that it's totally something that can happen. But then, like, this was last year that we heard that, and then, like, a few weeks later on one of our episodes, we talked about the super cheesy way to get through Night of the Zealot, where it's just like, you just wait, you just let the clock run out and then toss Lita at a ward off. And I was like, well, I could do that on expert.
Yeah, scenario 1, turn 1, resign. Scenario 2, turn 1, resign. And you have Lita, and then you just, like, hard mulligan for Lita.
See ya. One thing, thinking about hard mode in connection with a campaign, and I'm not sure if I fully believe this or not, but I'm going to throw it out there, which is that in standard mode, maybe it gets to the point with a campaign where it is kind of just mechanical and gamey because you know the scenario, you know what the likely results are going to be, and you're probably going to get the best results. Whereas with hard mode, leaving aside expert mode for a second, hard mode, because it is upping the RNG a bit. Like, on the one hand, you look at that and say, well, that's not the best like game experience or skill test. But on the other hand, is it perhaps a better RPG experience? Like, if you think about, like, it's gonna throw random, like, failure at you at points where you thought you were gonna succeed because you know the scenario, and then all of a sudden you just crapped out and bled on the altar. Like, it makes me think of the Captain Picard quote, which I'm probably gonna butcher, but it's one of my favorites from him, which is like, it's possible to make no mistakes and still lose. You know, that's life. Like,
That's
so
weakness, that's life.
I kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think of that hard mode that way. Like, it's possible in some situations to play a good game and a hard mode will still beat you. And you look at that from a game design perspective and you're like, well, that sucks. But perhaps it ends up telling a better story in a campaign because you have to kind of recover from unexpected setbacks, I guess.
But if you look on...
I was really hoping that you were going to say that Captain Picard quote that was, do or do not, there is no try.
Gandalf. Yeah.
Right, it's like Gandalf. Yeah, in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
But I mean, you look at any set of role-playing dice, and every single die in that set has a 1 on it, right? Like, that is a possibility.
Yeah.
And I think, Ian, you're totally correct. Like, if you want to play this like an RPG, maybe expert's the way to go. Because you can just roll really bad and just, I'm going to fight this thing, and then, you know, miss and punch yourself. Like, it's... that could happen.
Yeah, but you can't talk a good game to the cards. Like, in an RPG, the players can at least be like, well, you know, maybe in this situation, and the cards are still, like, the words aren't going to change. It still says, you know, do X, and you have to do X, so... But yeah, I mean, it changes the narrative for sure.
So if you're thinking of getting into hard mode, if you're one of our listeners who's played easy or standard, and you've maybe dabbled in hard, but you're scared to go to hard, like, I had that nervousness too. Honestly, I was nervous. I was like, oh, I don't want to go to hard and have a bad time. I found it's not that. The psychological barrier is the biggest barrier. If you really, you know, look at your decks and you're like, you know what, I've played a lot of games, I've played a lot of campaigns, I know how to tune a deck. I think you'll have a good time. I think it's really enjoyable.
Oh, yeah.
I enjoy the fact that I'm not always getting the best outcome. You're getting middle of the road, maybe sometimes a really bad one. That makes the game amazing because of the campaign style play. Yeah. It's an amazing experience. It's my go-to now for hard, so.
And if you're building a Mystic deck for hard, maybe consider leaving those Delve 2 Deeps behind. Like, they may not need that extra experience. Just... Maybe.
I think you have to...
Maybe bring them both for the first scenario, and then...
You have to delve carefully. You have to, like, delve, resign. It has to be a turn.
Delve just deep enough.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Any other parting thoughts or closing notes on this discussion? We really kind of burned through that. That was a quick... Look how fast this episode goes when Sean...
I was going to say... When Chatty Cathy isn't here.
We don't have to wait for him to stop singing.
There's a channel on our Discord called Deck Tech, and that's a really good channel. If you're looking into building a deck for hard or expert or whatever, and you want some advice, there's lots of players out there who have played a lot of hard and expert. Like, people are so willing to talk ad nauseum about building decks. So if that's something you're not sure about, that's a great place to go. Our Discord's just awesome. So
yeah, great people, great place to hang out. Moving on from there, we have some voicemails that we haven't got to yet, but I was not set up to play them because Sean is normally the one to play them, and since he had to duck out so close to recording time, I didn't get a chance to set myself up for that. Right. We have the questions written up here, so I'll leave it up to you guys. Do we want to just read these and address them since it's been weeks at this point, or do we still want to wait until we can actually hear the voicemail?
Let's read them.
These questions we have here were submitted to us through the website, so they're separate from the voicemails, actually. Yeah, so we can do them at any time. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's do them now, because these are things that we've actually kind of talked about somewhat recently. At least this first one was when we were going into our Lola episode about a month or so ago. This first question is, do you guys have a go-to scenario for testing new decks, or can you recommend one scenario that can serve as a good baseline for testing? I imagine this scenario would need to be well-rounded, requiring equal amounts of fighting, investigating movement, yada yada yada. Does any scenario meet these criteria? And this was submitted by one of our listeners named Scott, not our host, because he would know our answer to this. So yeah, what do you guys feel like is a good way to test a new deck?
Midnight Masks. I think that one is that is a great testing scenario. It has everything. It's got a big map. You got to go around. Each location's kind of different. It's got varying locations. You've got varying types of enemies and tests. Even the different parlay tests, like every single one is different. That is a well-rounded quest.
Yep, and it's got a really strong measurement for success or measurement for quality at the end when it's like, I got 5 of the 6 or I got 2 of the 6. Like, you have a very good idea for how you performed in regards to the scenario. It's very clear cut.
Yeah, it's hard for me to argue against that one. I tend not to just like get a deck, and for this game I don't tend to like, I have a new deck, let me test it against a scenario. I tend to just throw it into a campaign and see how it does and refine from there. So if I do have any testing going on, it's usually against the first scenarios in a campaign, and then I'll refine and maybe start the campaign again. But that being said, like the beginning of Dunwich, like House Always Wins isn't a great testing scenario in my opinion, because the way you get clues is just so different in the beginning, and extracurricular activity is it's kind of its own little beast. It tends to be very treachery heavy and not a ton of enemies, but the enemies you get can kind of throw you off. Anyway, the point being that I agree that Midnight Basks has a good balance that will test whether you can get a setup running quickly, whether you can gather clues like under time pressure and also take out enemies.
Right, and I'll go a step further and say that, and this is what we did leading up to our Lola episode, so that we felt confident about being able to talk about not only how do you build for Lola, but how do you upgrade Lola, is that play through Night of the Zealot as a whole campaign, because that'll give you enough experience between those 3 scenarios to where you get an idea for not only how does this deck perform, but what can I upgrade into to make this deck better, and what sort of path do I want to take. I think that core box it's like the consummate Arkham Horror experience.
Yeah. And you know what? Like I'm sure you guys have too. I've played the core so much that playing the core campaign doesn't take that long anymore.
Right.
So you can build a deck, especially if you're doing it solo, 3 hours maybe. Like
if
like
that,
that's a long core campaign. The first scenario, if you're a single player, you know the first scenario, 10 to 15 minutes. Like
Sure.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then Scott also submitted another question, which was, what do you think of the random basic weaknesses becoming far more devastating with certain investigators or deck types, particularly those with unique quote-unquote gimmicks? Are there any weaknesses that are particularly devastating for certain investigators, and are there any builds that you can think of where drawing one particular weakness would lose you the game almost every time? I think the go-to example of this would be Jenny with Paranoia, is it? Is that the one that gets rid of all resources?
Yes. Yeah, that hurts.
Like that hurts really bad. Whereas, again, Jenny with Indebted, like, okay, great.
Yeah.
You know, like, who cares?
Or Dark Horse build with
yeah,
Indebted.
how do you guys...
Or Dark Horse with Paranoia. It's like, okay, don't throw me in the briar patch.
Yeah, another one along similar lines that I kept running into at the beginning in the core set campaign in Dunwich was Wendy with Amnesia, which can really, really hurt because she likes to get her hand up to feel her ability, and then all of a sudden you lose your whole hand.
Yeah, I was going to say a higher ed build with Amnesia. That is backbreaking.
That card you spent 3 experience on, yeah, it's no use anymore. Give it a few turns. That's rough.
First action I draw, second action I draw, third action I draw. Like
third action I resign. I'm done.
Instead of delve, delve, resign, it's
Yeah.
draw, draw, resign. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but other than that, other than like those specific cases, I can't. Nothing really comes to mind about like any of those random ones that are particular. Like, I mean, there's always internal injury and whatever the opposite of that is, psychosis, where it's like if you get that on if you get internal injury on an investigator with really low, like on Rex, like that's you want to take care of that immediately. But it's just a double action to get rid of, and then you can still get 3-4 clues in one action, on top of that. So.
Yeah, I think it's just the part of the game that certain weaknesses, like when you're drawing your random weakness for your investigator, some of them are going to be a lot worse than others, and I think it's something I was a lot more hung up on at the beginning of the game. Like, well, this isn't 100% fair, and one of the things that I have seen, it'd be interesting to talk about this the next time we have Matt on here, is that I feel like part of the design philosophy of this game is that random element is a lot of times prized over the fairness element because it it leads to kind of stories that you wouldn't get otherwise, and kind of it's just, for lack of, even though sometimes I hate this argument of like it's Arkham to explain anything, like in this case I think it applies that, because if you don't have that random element and it's just like, oh, this is your weakness, then the predictability can take away some of the fun of the game, I think, sometimes. So sometimes you have to, even though the RNG can really hurt, sometimes that unpredictability is what you really want out of the game.
Yeah, it adds flavor to this game that doesn't exist in other card games. Even in a card game like Lord of the Rings, like the only real random element there is the shadow cards that are dealt on attacks. And they're generally like you have an idea, and there's shadow cards that just have nothing on them. So, like that's the closest analog. I hate to compare it to Lord of the Rings this deep in like a year into this podcast, and we're still doing that. But that's the closest analog to this game, and this game really embraces that randomosity, whereas other games generally don't.
Yeah.
Right.
I think if you're playing a Guardian too, what is it? Is it the mob enforcer or the detective that has 2 health? He's a really easy enemy. Like, if you have a machete out or any gun, you're like, oh no, I drew an enemy. Okay, what's next?
Yeah.
Like, it just...
Yeah. And another one, too, one that I think is, like, thematic, totally, like 100%, is overzealous in Zoe. I had that one time, and I was like, oh, this is just delicious. Like, this is great.
Do you guys, on this basic weakness talk, do you have, like, a number one... what you think is the worst weakness? Because I have one in my head, and I want to see what you guys say. Because I have a definitive one that is the worst.
As the worst? Yeah. Like, because I know which one's the best.
Indebted. Yeah.
Right. No contest. Any deck I would rather have Indebted than anything else. But what is the worst?
The worst one, just overall.
Ian, do you have anything? Because I don't even remember the names of all the weaknesses at this point. I know the King in wait a minute, no, the King in Yellow is Min's.
There's drawing the sign, which is
that might be what I'm thinking of.
But offhand, I might say overzealous. Actually, it's hard because it boils down to a lot of like which investigator you're gonna get. But if I'm thinking of
if you get overzealous and you draw 2 enemies on like a Daisy deck, like that's gonna be rough.
Yeah,
but
overzealous is the one.
Well, what do you have?
It's overzealous. Like,
that's what you think is the worst.
Drawing 2, like you go to draw a card in your deck, and instead of drawing a card, you draw 2 encounter cards.
Yeah.
When you put it that way, it's hard to argue with that logic.
You're gonna have to take a test probably, so you're gonna have to chuck cards so that card you didn't draw, you're even like your hand size is going even more negative. You might have an enemy pop up, like you said, on Daisy, Wendy, something that someone that can't fight. Like it can be absolutely backbreaking.
Especially if you draw it at the end of the round in solo or something, and then you draw another encounter card at the beginning of next round.
Yeah.
That's so rough.
I'm playing solo, but I'm also playing 3-player somehow.
Oh, man. Yeah, when you put it that way, I never thought of it just in terms of cards drawn as an action. Like, you're going from buffing your hand to literally, like, just doubling up on what you naturally do only once a turn. So,
It's amnesia plus more. Like,
Yeah.
kind of, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. And like I said, I'm terrible with with the weaknesses. I don't even know half of their names anymore. Like, I just know this one does that, this one does that. But I can see Overzealous getting that argument for worst overall. All right. Well, thanks for the questions, Scott. And
You're welcome.
And those were submitted, you said, through the website. So
Yep.
yeah,
So
it'd be awesome to see more of those if anyone is tooling around Mythos Busters podcast at .wordpress.com. Moving right along, I finally realized that, I don't know if I wrote this or if someone else did, it's just I forgot, but Masterpiece Theater for our impressions. We currently don't have any, at least last time I checked, we didn't have any new 5-star reviews that called out for an impression, so if you want to go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review of the podcast, you can write the review and then name a host and an impression that you want the host to read that review on the air as. And we've had some good ones so far, so looking forward to seeing some more in the future.
yeah, I know Nick is dying for one, so please give Nick one.
I wouldn't say dying for one. I'm anxious to see what I will eventually get, because I think I'll get one eventually. But so let's move right into Tentacle Time then. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
I was going to say, I think if someone submits a review on a iTunes from a different country, it may not always show up. So if you're from not USA or Canada, because that's where we are, feel free to message us on Discord. Be like, because there is a way for us to check other countries. We just have to know which country to go to. So if you're from like Nicaragua, I'm not going to scroll through all 200 countries that have iTunes and check for each one. So message us on Discord or whatever, and we'll go check that country. And then if you've given us a 5-star review and we haven't read it yet, please do that. So
Good point.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. So moving into Tentacle Time, I want to change it up a little bit from our normal routine with Tentacle Time. Instead of having us go one at a time and we all just talk about everything, let's go each host talks about one thing. Like, Scott, you can go first. You'll talk about one thing that you have for Tentacle Time, and then Ian will talk about one thing, and then we'll just kind of do a round table like that. Let's break it up a little.
What if I only have
So,
one
Scott,
thing?
then you're gonna do a lot of listening, pal, just like normally, except for now it'll be broken up.
I'm the thing with Tentacle Time is I'm pretty boring in my consumption of things. Like, if I play a game, I'm like, I'm gonna sink my heart and soul into this game, and I don't play any other games. Okay, you know what? My first one, I'm gonna go with Hearthstone. Still super excited.
Yeah.
They announced the next expansion and revealed some cards, and it looks amazing. And tomorrow, Monday, if you're listening to this later, there's a live stream with Brian Kibler. They're going to release a bunch of cards, reveal a bunch of cards, and I think it's just going to be absolutely fantastic. So,
how do you feel about? I really hope that Warlock gets a good legendary, because this current Warlock legendary that was spoiled is not good, and one of their legendaries from last expansion was not good. So I really hope that we get something that's really powerful for Warlock.
Well, they have their character legendary, so they have a legendary weapon. So
Sure.
I'm gonna guess it has something to do with discard, because they've been really pushing the discard Warlock. I have no idea what they would build it as, but
yeah.
So
I don't even know. I'm excited because that's an archetype that needs help is discard Warlock. Like, we have tools there, but not enough. Like, I regularly play discard Warlock, and it is hard.
do you play Wild or Standard?
I do a mix of both. I've been playing a lot of Wild lately, simply because it's been more fun to really play around with the whole card pool. Actually, I'd say this season in November here, I've pretty much only done Wild.
Yeah, me too.
I've done a little bit of Standard, but
Are you watching the stream tomorrow? Did you just find out about now?
I'm not. I just catch the cards in the Discord as they get released.
I was going to say we could watch it together over Discord and chat. But, okay, fine, whatever.
Well, maybe. Okay, all right. Fine. Ian, what's one of your tentacles?
Well, because I don't have enough projects going going on, I started a new Twitch series for that dead game, Lord of the Rings LCG, called Tea Time Tales. So if you go to twitch.tv/TalesFTcards, which is my Twitch stream, then every Friday at 12 my time, that's 12 Pacific, then I'm streaming some Lord of the Rings. So if you play that game, you can come watch me. Or if you just feel like watching me play a game you don't play, then you can do that too. That's fine. And then afterwards, they're all going up on the Tales from the Cards YouTube channel. So it's one of the big things I started recently, just to have some fun and kind of force me to try out new decks for that game.
So is there like, are you theming episodes at all? Or are you like, this episode I'm gonna try out a Rohan deck, or is it literally just whatever you want to play at the time?
It is the done two so far. The first one was just whatever random deck I wanted to play, and then from there now I'm doing kind of polls on Twitter. Like I'll throw up 3 kind of decks I'm thinking about trying, and then people can vote on that, so that determines. So kind of the whole shtick of the series is these are not like well done decks. These are not like the final product. These are like stuff I'm experimenting with. Like, I don't know, especially in that game, and I think in general, I just like trying to try out different weird decks instead of like the power decks that I know are going to work. So a lot of it is just trying out stuff and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it'll be nice to have an audience to tell you everything you're doing wrong.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I want to talk about is a game that I've been playing a lot recently called Fortnite. Fortnite or Fortnite, I suppose I should actually pronounce the first T in that word. Fortnite is a PC and PS. I play it on PS4. It's in early access currently, and it's a free download to play the early access. But what it is there's 2 game modes, but only one is available currently. Eventually they'll have like a PvE survival where it's a group of survivors up against waves of zombies, and there's it's third-person shooting in action, there's exploration, there's crafting, so all that stuff. But the version that you can play currently is a battle royale as inspired by PUBG, or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, where you have an island, and you are airdropped onto that island. You can pick where you go, like, you parachute in, and then you have nothing, and you have to collect gear as you go. And every few minutes, the map shrinks, and it forces the players to stay inside the new borders, and if you go outside, you die. So it really kind of forces you to encounter other players as you go. So you start with a huge area, and you can eventually get down to what's probably like, I don't know, 30-yard diameter circle. So it's a lot of fun. The highest I've gotten out of 100 players in Battle Royales, I've gotten to second place once. And I've gotten Sean, and then also another friend of ours, Brian, who was on the first stage of Cardboard of the Rings. I've gotten both of them into it, and we've had some fun shenanigans playing that as a team. But a lot of fun. I would suggest that anybody with a PC or a PS4 at least give it a try, because it's free.
It's on Xbox too, I believe.
Is it? See, and I have literally zero exposure to Microsoft stuff, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, I mean, give it a try. When it's free like that, there's no reason not to at least, dip your toe. Unless you know for sure that third-person PvP action is not your thing, then, salt to taste, obviously.
I've watched so many trailers for that game. I think I just need to bite the bullet and download it.
Yeah, it's good. It's fun. And it's because of the setup of it, again, a lot like PUBG, no 2 games really feel the same. Like, they all kind of have their own identity and their own feeling to it, simply because the map changes every time. The gear you have on you changes every time. And like maybe one session, like the reason why I got to number 2 in that one game I did was because I just camped out inside of a shack at the end up until there was only one guy left, and then I was like, well, I guess I gotta go outside and get him. And yeah, it came down to he was hidden better than I was. So, but it's a lot of fun. I definitely suggest trying it out. Scott, what you got?
Rainbow Six Siege, my other video game. super tactical shooter. I love it. They're coming out with they just announced their new operators, which is basically your loadout or whatever. Yeah, been playing a lot of it. I'm really bad at Tentacle Time because basically I'm like, hey, I played this game and it's fun. If you don't play it, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
Sure. So the last Tom Clancy game that I played was Rogue Spear.
What?
Back in like the year 2002.
Goodness.
I think mine was probably like the first Rainbow Six.
Rogue Spear came out right after Rainbow Six because I loved Rainbow Six, and I was like, I'll get Rogue Spear, so I got that, and then from there I just lost track of Tom Clancy games. So
yeah, Rainbow Six is like super super tactical. You get a single life as most Tom Clancy games you do, and it's very much like if you played hardcore Search and Destroy in any of the Call of Duties. There's an objective, there's a defense team, an offensive team, and the thing with Rainbow Six is you choose an operator, and they have a specific like neat trick, but the other team doesn't know what operator you've chosen until they see you, either by drone or whatever. So you can like this one lady, she's actually from Canada. I forget what her name is. Ice or something like that.
Well, we know why you pick her.
No, she has a bear trap, and so you can lay this bear trap like beneath a window. So they pop in through a window, and then they get hit by the bear trap. Like that's just a gadget or whatever. Yeah, it's super fun. You need a team of 5 to play it. Good because you need communication, but yeah,
yeah, that's how Overwatch has kind of gotten for me. It's like I try to play competitive. Anyway, I'll talk about that later. Ian, what do you got?
Well, I was going to talk about the latest LOTR LCG FAQ that came out, but I think I'm going to wait till Sean's here so we can get the full discussion going. So I will skip that until next episode.
I was excited to hear. I was excited to hear some salt from Ian because your notes looked a little salty.
No, I added those notes for Ian.
That was Scott adding salt to taste on my entry.
Worst FAQ ever. Who wrote this? Buzz Killington? Like, what the hell?
We'll talk about it next time.
Sure.
So the only thing I ever... I think I'm bad at Tentacle Time, too. I think I've just been trying to keep up with the shows that I'm tracking right now, which has been Star Trek Discovery, Mr. Robot, and what's the other one?
Mr. Robot.
The Orville. I think those are the 3 I've been watching. So Star Trek Discovery just had their fall finale. And now that the first half is done, I have to say I was very nervous about Star Trek coming back to TV and what it would be like and whether it would live up to kind of what I wanted. And I'm not even sure what I wanted out of Star Trek in 2017. But it's super good. Like, Star Trek shows are notorious for starting out kind of slow, and the first seasons are not great a lot of times, but this is super solid, and they got renewed for second season, so I'm excited for
cool.
It's definitely different than other Treks, but
that's what I've been hearing.
It's a new era, and I feel like it still kind of captures the things that I do like about Trek. So yeah, it's a really good show though.
I've never been someone who's been like too into Star Trek. Like I've seen a fair share of episodes, and I have like just from being a part of nerd culture, I have a pretty decent awareness of Star Trek and everything. But from what I've heard, Discovery has been a pretty divisive
for sure.
series. I'm glad to hear that it's gotten a second season at least, so it can continue to explore these radical new ideas that it's presenting. So.
I think a lot of that that division was before the show even came on the air. One, because of the model where it was only available on the CBS All Access instead of like being shown on TV like every other Trek show has, and then also just different bad blood, like CBS sued like a prominent fan fiction movie creator that was trying to make a Star Trek movie, and there was just a lot of things that happened in the past few years, and then there's just the typical nerd culture stuff of like you're changing stuff I like about the franchise I like the look of certain things, and so I'm gonna hate it right away. So yeah, some of it justified, some of it not. But I feel like a lot of the division is from a lot of people who haven't even watched it yet. Everyone all the Trek fans I know who have actually watched it have really enjoyed it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. It turns out it's easy to hate on something you know nothing about. All right, my next thing that I want to talk about is The Thing, Infection at Outpost 31, the board game that won Gen Con to me. Like, that defined my Gen Con demoing experience. Not this last weekend, a couple weekends ago now, I was down in the cities, and we were at we stopped in at FFG briefly, and they had it in stock. So I think everybody who went as our group got their own copy. And we played 2 games of it that night, and I've played 2 other games of it since. And it continues to be one of my favorite board games that I've played this last year. I can kind of see some issues with it. They're minor, but they're there. Like, we played 5-player games. Originally, we played 2 5-player games, and they went great. They went really well. Other than misreading a couple of the rules, which, pro tip, don't do that. It played really well, and it was everything that I expected it to be from my Gen Con experience. But then after that, we played 2 4-player games. I played that with a different group. And I'm going to be honest, for anybody who's familiar with this game and its setup, I have no idea how the humans can win in a 4-player game. It's just bananas. So you start with 3 humans and 1 person's the thing, and then by the time you advance into Act 2, there's going to be probably 1 other thing. It's not guaranteed, but it's likely. So then you're playing a 2-on-2 game. The problem is that the things want to fail missions, a lot like in Resistance, how if you're a spy in Resistance, you want to fail missions. So that's what the imitations want to do. But in a 4-player game of the thing, the vast majority of your missions that you're going on require all 4 players to be on it. So when that's the case, the first 4-player game we played, the humans lost before we advanced out of Sector 1, before we got through the first act of the game. So 4-player thing, not that great. 5+, awesome. I'm guessing, I'm going to say that 6 is probably that sweet spot, because then you're looking at 2 to 3 things by the end of the game. So, but yeah, it was rough. And Ian, I know, have you had a chance to actually pick it up yet, Ian, or do you have plans
not yet,
to?
But yeah, I'm definitely going to pick it up at some point.
Yeah, it's a great game otherwise, and I'm such a big fan of The Thing, the movie, both the 2011 and the 1982 films, that it's a perfect addition to my game shelf, and I'm glad it's there. But 4-player, either go into it expecting a loss as a human, or just try and find a 5th player.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever play the Xbox game, The Thing?
No.
I played the PS2 one, which I'm guessing is probably just the port of the same thing.
Yeah, I played that thing. I love that game.
I loved it too. It was janky as hell, and there were some bosses, there was this one, I remember there was this one boss that was this big monster in this little room, and I'm I gotta be missing something, because I kept dying. It can reach me anywhere I stand, and I'm reading all these FAQs online, and I just realized that, no, I'm not missing anything. I just have to out DPS this thing, and it was but so there's some issues with it, but it is really fun. It has a really cool, managing party trust and that sort of thing, which is something that I hadn't seen in a game before.
Yeah, that was my first exposure to The Thing, and that, yeah.
Oh, really? You never saw any of the movies?
No, I was sheltered as a kid, and so, yeah, that was my first exposure. I was like, man, this is awesome. Yeah, so I want to try that game. It sounds amazing. So. Yeah,
it definitely is. Next time, geez, at this rate, it'll probably be next Arkham Knights when I'll see you again, but I'll make sure I bring it.
Yeah, I don't travel to Minnesota very often. Do you come to Edmonton often, or no?
Every other weekend I try to get up there, but it's been hard with the holidays coming and everything.
Speaking
All right, Scott,
speaking of treks, I have recently completed a Star Trek trek that Ian helped me out a lot with, actually. I felt the need to watch because I always loved the Next Generation, like Star Trek Next Generation, and I was like, you know what, I watched it a lot when I was younger, and I would just watch whatever was on at 5 p.m. on a weekday, because it was always reruns or whatever. I was like, I want the Star Trek Next Generation experience. So I asked Ian for like, Ian, do you have a top 10 list? And he's like, yes, I actually have a written down list.
Oh, that's so good.
So I watched those episodes. Brian, who Ian and Nick probably both know, he was on Cardboard of the Rings. He's a huge Trekkie. I just pummeled these guys for information, and I ended up watching like I think 40 episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Wow.
It was amazing. I love that series, and then I watched like a couple 1-star rated shows of it, and
Get the other side of the spectrum.
And then you saw the true Next Generation.
Season 1 and 2, not the greatest.
No.
Nope.
But yeah, if you are interested in doing like seeing the best Next Generation episodes, talk to Ian or myself. I have a list now, and there's a website that like all these Super Trekkie fans rated the episodes like from 1 to 5. I basically just watched every episode rated 5, and it was absolutely amazing. It was better than any movie I've watched. So yeah.
Wow. And also, if you want to see the worst Star Trek Next Generation episodes,
You can get that list too.
Yep.
Ian, do you have anything else that you want to go over?
I do not. I love how Nick proposed the roundtable format when he's the one who has like 5 or 6 things.
I even moved some of them off because I'm like, fine, I don't want to be talking for an hour. Like,
I'll just say on Scott's point, one of the things that I do, I grew up watching Star Trek, so there's the nostalgia element, but one of the things I also appreciate is like, well, I do love the current era of TV, and there's so many, like, most of my favorite shows are from the past 5 years or whatever. It truly is the golden age of television. One thing I do miss from kind of Next Generation in that era is like having shows that actually have some element of like optimism or hope to them, because this is a very dark era of TV. All the top rated shows tend to be pretty bleak in outlook, so it's nice to have that contrast sometimes.
Speaking of which, Nick, what's your
I was just going to say, Ian totally gave me a softball there, because the next thing that I want to talk about is the absolute depths of human depravity and bleakness in television. Because my wife and I are watching Ozark currently. I know Scott has said great things about the show. I've heard other people say that it's really good, and it's one that I wanted to watch. And it's dark. It's almost like True Detective season 1 dark. It's kind of along that lines of where it's not constant, but you get these moments where it's just like, oh man, like that's rough. But at the same time, if you want to see, like, it's almost House of Cards level of like scheming and conniving and machinations. But the difference is that like House of Cards is, by the end of the first season, you see, oh, this was planned from episode 1. Like this was all one big work. Whereas with Ozark, it's that same level of planning, but it's all on the fly, and it's all, how do I react to this situation? So the premise is that Jason Bateman, Scott talked about it before, but Jason Bateman plays an accountant for a big drug cartel overlord in Chicago, and then he ends up moving to the Ozarks in order to launder money for that overlord. And it's so, like, every episode is tense, and every character kind of like rides that line between likable and unlikable, which, I'm not always a fan of in my shows, but when shows that do it well come along, like this, I'm a huge fan of it. So the same reason why I love True Detective season 1 so much, like that's why I'm loving Ozark so much. So I think we're like an episode or 2 away from being done with the first season. And then after that, I'll just need to watch something with my son, like Bob the Builder or Dino Trucks or something, to wash away all that bleakness.
That was like after True Detective, like that show messed me up in the head. I'm like, okay, I need a palate cleanser. What can I watch? Let me go back to IT Crowd and binge that.
Oh my god.
Which is another great show.
Yes.
But yeah, my wife has been very patient with me, because it's like she likes to watch maybe one episode of Ozark every few days because it's just too dark for her. And the other night we watched 2 in a row. Like, I didn't even ask. I just started the next one because to me it's like I want to keep going. I want to see where this goes because it's just so engaging. But yeah, by the end of it, I'm gonna need a lighter light in my life.
What episode are you on?
Oh, geez, the one that we just finished.
Because there's 10 episodes, I believe.
Yeah, I want to say we're on like 8 or 9.
Okay.
Honey, do you know offhand which Ozark episode we're on?
When you sit down for number 10, hold on to your fucking hat. That is a show I binge watched in 2 days. I was sitting at home, I was on a day off, and
I know my was one where she tried to electrocute me now.
Sorry, did you hear my wife?
Yes.
I don't know if she
think
came
you're
across
on
the mic.
8.
Okay.
You just finished 8. So anyways, I had a day off. I was like, I'm going to try out this show because I like Jason Bateman. And I watched the first episode. I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to watch the second episode. Then my wife came home as I was finishing the 6th episode. And then the next day I had another day off during the week. And so I just finished the series. It's amazing. I've heard it described as Breaking Bad for accountants.
Interesting. Because I haven't seen any of Breaking Bad, so yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, sorry, I won't go on that rant.
I know. It's one of the big television social faux pas is to say, "Oh, I haven't seen any of Breaking Bad." But
pretty good one.
yeah, and it's funny because we actually were starting another show, and then we ended up watching Ozark. So how it went is we got 2 episodes into 3 different shows. We started with Iron Fist. We got 2 episodes into Iron Fist, and we were both kind of we weren't really feeling it, but I was a little more open to where it was going to go. My wife was just not interested. So we watched the first 2 episodes of Ozark, and we're like, okay, this is really compelling, but it's a very unique taste. And then Stranger Things 2 came out, which I noticed none of us talked about.
Let's save that for next episode, because I think we want all 4 of us here to talk about that.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
But so then we watched all of Stranger Things 2, and then we went back to Ozark, and I at one point I was like, do you have any interest in continuing Iron Fist? And my wife's like, no. And then I thought about it, I'm like, I really don't either, which just kills me, because I love Luke Cage and Jessica Jones so much, and Daredevil was so good, but Iron Fist is just falls flat.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Punisher dropped, so I need to get around to watching that.
Yes. Yeah, I do need to watch that one too. Well, that's all that I have for tentacles. So if anybody... Scott, do you have one to close us off with?
I guess another video game that I've been sinking my soul into is Dying Light. It's like Grand Theft Auto Zombies. It's fantastic.
So you run around hijacking zombies?
No, it's more like it's super, super sandboxy. And it's like...
I didn't really think that you hijacked zombies.
But they just added... I just downloaded the DLC, which is free, where they added vehicles. Because normally it was all on foot and was very parkour-ish, but you start out where you have you're fighting zombies with a broken mop stick, or and it sucks. And eventually you get to the point where you're crafting weapons that get better and stuff like that. But that game is the game that has scared the crap out of me the most. It has a day-night cycle, and when it goes to nighttime...
I was just going to ask if that was the day-night one. Yep. Okay, I know which one you're talking about.
When it's nighttime, I seriously... I run for, one of my headquarters, and I just sleep. I'm I don't want to play the game at night. No thank you. It's freaky as hell. But yeah, super awesome game. So if you play Dying Light on Xbox, message me on Discord. I want to play with you, so...
I feel so, and I know I'm just fitting into that current stereotype, but I feel just so exhausted with zombie stuff currently that
Nick, I am so the same way. I hate the zombie meta genre, whatever you want to call it. And a couple coworkers a couple years ago convinced me to get this game. It's the only zombie-esque thing I like. It's just an amazing game.
Well, and that's the thing is that I'll see zombie games that look interesting, but because they're because zombies are the main threat in the game, it just reduces my drive to actually experience it. But that is one that I thought looked promising a couple years ago when I first saw videos for it. I was like, ooh, that looks cool, because there's you can upgrade your running, you can upgrade your gunplay, or what your crafting. There's different ways you can progress your character.
It's very RPG-ish.
And then the fact that it's right, yeah, and I thought that looked really cool. But it's also action at the same time, because it's all first-person shooting and running and all that.
Well, to give you an idea, I hate the zombie genre, and I'm playing this game 3 years later. So, Grand Theft.
That's a good endorsement.
Grand Theft Auto Zombies. So there you
All right. Well, unless anyone has any final things to say, I think that about does it for our show. So thanks always to our live listeners for stopping in and listening to this episode. Thank you to you for listening to this podcast via our RSS feed, I assume. As always, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, name a host and an impression to get your review read out live on the show in that impression. Also, we have our Mythosbusters hotline, which we didn't play any messages today, but I know for sure that we have one for next episode, and that number is 203-493-MYTH. So go ahead and dial that, ask us a question, leave us a message, we'll play it on the air. You can check us out on Twitter at Mythosbusters. You can visit our website, mythosbusterspodcast.wordpress.com. Email us at mythosbusterspod@gmail.com. Check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/mythosbusters, discord.me/mythosbusters. You guys know the drill by now. Thanks very much for listening, and we will catch you guys next time.